Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Chapter 35, in which Passepartout does not have repeated to him twice the order his master gives him. The next day, the residents of Saville Row would have been much surprised if they had been told that Phileas Fogg had returned to his dwelling. The doors and windows were all closed, no change had taken place outside. After leaving the depot, Phileas Fogg had gave Passepartout an order to buy some provisions, and he had gone into his house. This gentleman received with habitual impassibility the blow which struck him. Ruined, and by the fault of that awkward detective. After moving on with steady steps during the long trip, overturning 1,000 obstacles, braving 1,000 dangers, and having still found time to do good on his route, to fail before a brutal attack which he could not foresee, and against when he was defenceless, that was terrible. He had left only an insignificant remnant of a large sum which he had taken away with him when he started on his journey. His fortune now only consisted of £20,000 deposited at Baring Brothers, and those £20,000 he owed to his colleagues of the Reform Club. Having incurred so many expenses, if he had won the bet he would have not been enriched. It is probable that he had not sought to enrich himself, in being that the class of men who bet to stake honour, but this bet lost would ruin him entirely. The gentleman's decision was taken. He knew what remained for him to do. A room in the house of Saville Row was set apart by Mrs. Auda. The young woman was desperate. For certain words which Mr. Fogg let drop, she understood that he contemplated some fatal design. It is known, indeed, to somewhat lamentable extremities these Englishmen are carried sometimes under the pressure of a fixed area. Thus, Passepartout, without seeming to do so, was closely watching his master. But first the good fellow descended to his room and turned off the burner which had been burning for 80 days. He found the letter box and note from the gas company, and he thought that it was more than time to stop the expenses for which he might be responsible. The night passed. Mr. Fogg had retired, but had he slept? As for Mrs. Auda, she could not take a single moment's rest. Passepartout watched, like a dog, at his master's door. The next morning Mr. Fogg sent him an order very briefly to prepare Mrs. Auda's breakfast. As for himself, he would be satisfied with a cup of tea and a piece of toast. Mrs. Auda would be kind enough to excuse him from a breakfast and dinner, but for all the time he would be devoted to arranging his affairs. He would not come down. He would only ask Mrs. Auda's permission to have a few moments' conversation with her in the evening. Passepartout, having given the programme for the day, had nothing to do but to conform to it. He looked at his master, still so impassible, and he could not make up his mind to quit his room. His heart was full, and his conscience weighed down with remorse, for he accused himself more than ever for this irreparable disaster. Yes, if he had warned Mr. Fogg, if he had disclosed to him the plans of Detective Fix, Mr. Fogg would have not dragged the Detective Fix with him as far as Liverpool, and then Passepartout could not hold it any longer. "Master, Monsieur Fogg!" he cried, "curse me, it is through my fault that—" "I blame no one," replied Phileas Fogg in the calmest tone. "Go." Passepartout left the room, and went to find the young woman, whom he made known his master's intentions. "Madame," he added, "I can do nothing by myself, nothing at all. I have no influence over my master's mind. You, perhaps—" "What what influence would I have?" replied Mrs. Auda. "Mr. Fogg is subject to none. Has he ever understood my gratitude for him was overflowing? Had he ever read my heart? My friend, you must not leave him a single instant. You must say that he has shown a desire to speak to me this evening?" "Yes, madame. It is no doubt for reference to make your position in England comfortable." "Let us wait," replied the young woman, who was quite pensive. Thus during this day, Sunday, the house in Saville Row was as if uninhabited, and for the first time since he lived there, Phileas Fogg could not go to his club, where the Parliament House struck half-past 11. And why should this gentleman have presented himself at the Reform Club? His colleagues no longer expected him, since Phileas Fogg did not appear at the saloon of the Reform Club the evening of the day before. On this fatal day, Saturday, December 21st, at a quarter before 9, his bet was lost. It is not even necessary that he should go to his bankers to draw the sum of £20,000. His opponents had in their hands a cheque signed by him, and it only needed a simple writing to go to Baring Brothers in order to get that £20,000 might carried to their credit. Mr. Fogg had then nothing to take him out. He did not go out, he remained in his room, putting his affairs in order. Passepartout was continually going up and down the stairs. The hours did not move for this poor fellow. He listened at the door of the master's room. In doing so, he did not think he committed the least indiscretion. He looked through the keyhole, and imagined that he had this right. Passepartout feared at every moment some catastrophe. Sometimes he thought a fix, but change had taken place in his mind. He no longer blamed the detective. Fix had been deceived, like everyone else, with respect to Phileas Fogg. In following him, arresting him, he had only done his duty, while he thought it overwhelmed him. He had only considered him the most wretched of human beings. When finally Passepartout would be too unhappy to be alone, he would knock at Mrs. Ouda's door, enter her room, and sit down in a corner without saying a word, and look at the young woman with a pensive air. About 7:30 in the evening, Mr. Fogg sent to ask Mrs. Ouda if she could receive him. In a few moments after the young woman and he were alone in the room. Fogg took a chair and sat down near the fireplace, opposite Mrs. Ouda. His face reflected no emotion. Fogg returned was exactly the Fogg who had gone away. The same calmness, the same impassibility. He remained, without speaking, 5 minutes. Then, raising his eyes to Mrs. Aura, he said, "Madame, will you pardon me for having brought you to England?" "Ay, Mr. Fogg," replied Mrs. Aura, suppressing a throbbing of her heart. "Be kind enough to allow me to finish," continued Mr. Fogg. "When I thought that I was taking you so far away from that country, becoming so dangerous for you, I was rich, and I was counted for placing a portion of my fortune at your disposal. Your life would have been happy and free. Now I am ruined." "I know it, Mr. Fogg," replied the young woman, "and I will turn to ask you, will you pardon me for having followed you, and, who knows, for perhaps assisted by your ruin by delaying you? Madame, you could not have remained in India, and your safety was only assured by removing you so far that those fanatics could not retake you." "So, Mr. Fogg," replied Miss Auda, "not satisfied with rescuing me from a horrible death, you believe that you are obliged to assure my position abroad?" "Yes, madame," replied Fogg, "but events have turned against me. However, I ask your permission to dispose of the little I have left in your favour." "But you, Mr. Fogg, what will become of you?" asked Miss Auda. "I, madame," replied the gentleman coldly, "I do not need anything." "But how, sir, do you look upon fate that awaits you?" "I ought to look at it," replied Mr. Fogg. "In any event," continued Miss Auda, "want could not reach such a man as you. Your friends—" "I have no friends, madame." "Your relatives—" "I have no relatives now." "I pity you, then, Mr. Fogg, for solitude is a sad thing. What! have you not one heart in which to pour your troubles? They say, however, that with two misery itself is bearable." "They say so, madame." "Mr. Fogg, then," said Miss Auda, rising and holding out her hand to the gentleman, "adieu. You wish once a relative, a friend. Will you have me for your wife?" Mr. Fogg, at this, rose in his turn. There seemed to be an unusual reaction in his eyes, a trembling of his lips. Miss Auda looked at him. The sincerity, rectitude, firmness, and sweetness of this soft look of a noble woman, who dared everything to save him from to whom she owed everything, first astonished him, then penetrated him. He looked closed his eyes for an instant, as if to prevent this look from penetrating deeper. When he opened them again, he simply said, "I love you. Yes, in truth, but everything is most sacred in the world. I love you, and I am entirely yours." "Ah!" cried Miss Auda, pressing his hand onto her heart. He ran for Passepartout. He came immediately. Mr. Fogg was still holding Miss Auda's hand in his. Passepartout understood, and his broad face shone like a sun in the zenith of tropical regions. Mr. Fogg asked him if he would be too late to notify Rev. Samuel Wilson of Marylebone Parish. Passepartout gave his most genial smile. "Never too late," he said. It was then 5 minutes after 8. "It will be for tomorrow, Monday," he said. "For tomorrow, Monday?" asked Mr. Fogg, looking at the young woman. "For tomorrow, Monday," replied Miss Auda. Passepartout went out, running as hard as he could.